Somewhere inside the castle, a fierce clash was taking place, an unrelenting exchange of swords between a hero and a demoness. Both of them were confused. For the hero, the situation felt strange, while the demoness was left in disbelief. They both wondered why neither of them could break the other's weapon. In their minds, each of them believed their own sword was supposed to be the strongest one. When they finally stepped back from each other, the hero mentioned that there was something he wanted to ask. At the same time, the demoness revealed that she also had something she wanted to ask as well. In the end, they both asked the exact same question, wanting to know who forged the other's sword. The moment they noticed the carving on each sword's pommel, silence filled the air. The demoness immediately realized that it had to be that stubborn blacksmith, while the hero let out a sigh as he came to the same conclusion that it was indeed the old man. The hero explained that after crossing swords for so long, he had come to realize that his power and the demoness' power were about equal. He added that the battle would never end as long as they both continued fighting with those swords. The demoness agreed that continuing the fight had become pointless, and at the very least, they were able to agree on that much. Because of that, they decided that their generation would have to call a truce. They even found it amusing that they were doing all this simply to avoid making the blacksmith angry. The demoness remarked that the blacksmith had probably already foreseen this outcome from the very beginning, and because of that, he was not someone they should underestimate. The hero agreed with her thoughts, and after that, the two of them went their separate ways. All of this happened because of the legendary blacksmith. But before any of that came to pass, he first died on that very day, and everything began when Izo saved a cat from an incoming truck. That was the day he lost his life. The only reason he jumped out without hesitation was simply because he liked cats. When Izo opened his eyes again, he found himself floating in an unfamiliar place. A voice asked if he was awake, then mentioned that it seemed there was no damage to his soul. Izo questioned who the girl was, and she explained that, simply put, he had died in that world. Izo recalled saving the cat, then looked down at his own hand and realized that he was truly dead. At the same time, he wondered why he felt so calm despite the situation. The girl explained that normally, his soul would have already been decomposed and stored away as a new resource. However, she had temporarily put that process on hold and slowed down his spirit so that the shock would not damage his soul. She had witnessed him saving the stray cat before dying, and Izo acknowledged it. The girl then revealed that the cat he had saved was actually her. Hearing that left Izo stunned. She explained that she was a watchdog who wandered from world to world, with the duty of observing each one so they would not negatively affect one another. She had used the appearance of a cat while acting as a lookout in his world. According to her, she had made a mistake and nearly died, but Izo ended up saving her. Izo responded by mentioning that it sounded like she held a very high-ranking position, but if a truck could hit her, then he wondered if she could actually die. The girl explained that her temporary body could indeed die, but since it was only temporary, it would not have any real effect on the world itself. However, she then revealed that there was now a problem in the world because Izo was never supposed to die in the first place. To correct the situation, it had been decided that she would compensate Izo by giving him another existence. Hearing that, Izo admitted that he did not fully understand how everything worked, and he wondered if it would not be easier for her to simply erase the accident instead of going through something so complicated. The girl explained that doing so would indeed be the easiest solution, but there was one major problem. She had already observed the incident. Whatever she witnessed would automatically be reported and turned into an official record. Because of that, she apologized and revealed that Izo's death could no longer be annulled. Izo realized from her explanation that there was truly nothing more she could do about his death. The girl then mentioned that a similar incident had once happened in another world before. Because of that, what she planned to do now was exchange Izo's existence with the existence of someone from their world, placing them in Izo's world while Izo would take their place in theirs. Izo was surprised by the explanation and wondered if that meant he would end up living as someone else. The girl quickly recognized that he understood the situation better than expected. After hearing all of that, Izo admitted that he still had one important question. He wanted to know why she was going so far out of her way just to keep him alive. The girl explained that she had been the one who made the mistake, and on top of that, Izo had saved her life. Because of those reasons, she would not feel at ease if he simply disappeared for good. She then added that there was another reason as well. As a way of showing her sincerity and gratitude, she planned to give him a cheat for the world he was about to live in. Izo became curious about what exactly she meant by a cheat. The girl explained that it was something like special knowledge or an ability that would make living in that world much easier for him. She also mentioned that she would prepare a house for him as well. After that, she asked Izo what kind of life he ideally wanted to live. Hearing the question caused Izo to reflect on his previous life. He had no family and spent his life completely alone, working endlessly at a sweatshop company as a programmer. Before he even realized it, he had already become an old man with gray hair. If he suddenly disappeared, the only person who would probably care was his boss, and even then, someone else would quickly take his place afterward. As those thoughts raced through his mind, Izo realized that there was not really anything left for him in that life. Still, he did not want to simply vanish either. To him, this felt like a second chance. Izo admitted that he would like to make a living by creating things, since making things had always been his hobby. The girl assured him that she could make that happen. Izo then added that although the incident had been accidental, he loved cats enough that he would even risk his life trying to save one. If possible, he wanted to live a slow and peaceful life surrounded by cats. The girl then asked what exactly he wanted to create. Izo revealed that he had always been interested in swordsmithing, but he never had the opportunity to pursue it before. The girl agreed to his wish and declared that she would grant him the experience and abilities of a blacksmith. Along with that, she would also provide him with knowledge of the language, general knowledge about the world, combat ability, and a small amount of magical power as well. At that moment, a bright light enveloped Izo. He was suddenly thrown downward. Soon after, Izo woke up in the middle of a forest. The moment he sat up, pain spread throughout his entire body, accompanied by a splitting headache. At the same time, a strange sensation suddenly rushed through his mind. Izo wondered what was happening to his head, body, and even his fingertips, as unfamiliar information continuously poured into them. It was at that moment that the reality finally hit him that his old life was truly over. He realized that his body was only just now adjusting, and he slowly opened and closed his hand while testing the feeling. His entire body felt rebuilt with unknown knowledge and unfamiliar experiences. To him, it was an incredibly strange sensation, almost like some kind of installation process. Then, nearby, he noticed a house standing in the forest. Izo remembered the girl mentioning that she would prepare a house for him. With that in mind, he approached the building, opened the door, and stepped inside. Inside, he found a kitchen, a bedroom, ingredients, and various tools already prepared. Everything he needed to survive seemed to already be there. He figured those supplies would last him for quite some time. There was no electricity, running water, or even a well, so he assumed he would eventually have to search for a nearby water source. Then his attention shifted toward another room close by. The moment he entered that room, he was surprised. He quickly realized that it was a workspace, and all the necessary materials and tools had already been prepared there as well. When he picked up a hammer, his hands and fingers instinctively understood exactly how and when to use it. At that moment, he understood it completely. He found the feeling surprisingly nice. Izo realized that this was the so-called cheat, along with the ability to use a small amount of magic. Soon after, a sudden wave of hunger hit him. Looking at the time of day, he figured it was already noon and decided that he should first prepare lunch. After eating something, he planned to head outside and search for a source of water nearby. Izo gathered ingredients in the kitchen and prepared the fire. As he looked at his own hand, he was surprised to see a small flame ignite from it. The flame was tiny, far too weak to maintain for long or produce high temperatures, but it was still useful for starting a fire. Once he finished preparing himself, he headed outside to search for water nearby. While wandering through the forest, he spotted a green squirrel, making him realize once again that he truly was in another world. He began wondering what kind of forest this was and just how large it might be. At the same time, he wondered if there were any towns or villages nearby, since he had not been given much information about things like that. He realized that aside from the abilities he had received, he barely knew anything else about this world. As he continued walking, he came across an herb and immediately recognized it as a medicinal plant. He figured that the ability to identify it must be part of the essential knowledge he had been given. Even so, it still felt strange to understand something he had never actually learned himself. He picked several of the herbs before continuing onward. As time passed, Izo realized that both his mind and body were slowly becoming accustomed to this new world. After walking farther into the forest, he estimated that the water source was about 15 minutes away from the house on foot, which he figured would make for decent daily exercise. Nearby, he finally discovered fresh water. Looking down at his reflection on the surface, he noticed that the girl had made him younger just as he had requested. Judging by his appearance, he figured he now looked around 30 years old. Izo soon noticed fish swimming in the water and realized that fishing was also an option for getting food. Not long after, he suddenly heard rustling nearby. Curious, he wondered what it could be and whether something was lying there. As he moved closer to investigate, he discovered a woman lying unconscious on the ground. When he approached and checked on her condition, he quickly noticed that she was bleeding. As he carefully turned her over, he spotted a tail, leaving him confused about whether she was a person, a tiger, or some kind of beast woman. Izo immediately realized that she would not survive unless he brought her back to the house right away, so he quickly carried her in his arms. The woman reacted in pain as he moved her, but he encouraged her to endure it for a little longer despite the difficulty. Back at the house, Izo searched for sewing tools. After that, all he needed was cloth. He tore apart some fabric and used it to prepare bandages, then boiled water so he could sterilize a needle. Izo carefully laid the woman down on the bed and prepared to examine her injuries. Just as he expected, the most serious wound was the one on her stomach. Thanks to the cheat he had received, he instinctively understood exactly what he needed to do. Enduring the painful installation process earlier had truly paid off. Using the sterilized needle and thread, he began stitching the wound closed. As he worked, the woman felt sharp pain, and Izo tried to reassure her that it would be over soon. Once the treatment was finished, he also had her consume one of the medicinal herbs. Afterward, her condition appeared to stabilize. Even so, Izo admitted to himself that while he somehow managed to perform first aid, he was still only an amateur when it came to medical treatment. If the wound ended up leaving a scar, all he could really do was apologize for it. Thinking about disinfection and reducing fever, he felt relieved that the herbs he had gathered earlier turned out to be useful after all. Soon after, exhaustion began catching up to him. At that moment, Izo fully realized that this world was now the place where he would spend the rest of his life. He began thinking about how he needed to prepare himself to live as a blacksmith. There were still many things he needed to do, but since this was his second chance at life, he wanted to live in a relaxed and peaceful way instead of becoming a workaholic again. Izo figured that maybe he could start working properly tomorrow. For now, he decided to continue checking on the woman's condition from time to time. He knew it would be bad if he accidentally fell asleep, but eventually, exhaustion overtook him. Resting his head near the bed, he slowly drifted off to sleep. Sometime later, the woman climbed on top of him, marking the beginning of the rest of his new life. The tiger woman suddenly grabbed Izo by the neck, but he quickly realized that there was barely any strength behind her grip. From that alone, he understood that she was not actually trying to kill him. Izo immediately asked if the wound on her stomach was all right. Hearing that caused the tension around her to ease slightly, allowing him to calm down as well. She admitted that it still hurt, but it was healing. Izo felt relieved after hearing her response. The tiger woman then questioned whether Izo had seen her naked body. Izo explained that he needed to examine her properly in order to treat the wound, and he assured her that he had not touched anything else unnecessarily. She leaned closer and sniffed him carefully before finally relaxing a little more, deciding that she would trust him for the time being. According to her, Izo did not carry the scent of someone lying. Curious, Izo asked what she meant by that. She explained it in a simple way, comparing it to how a person's heart starts beating faster. Izo quietly felt grateful that she was not making the situation unnecessarily awkward. He then tossed some clothes toward her and told her to put them on. He explained that her previous clothes had been heavily stained with blood, and he had no choice but to cut them apart while treating her injuries. The tiger woman accepted the explanation casually, and Izo apologized just in case the clothes had been important to her. However, she dismissed the concern, treating them as nothing more than old rags. The tiger woman then asked if this place belonged to him, and Izo confirmed that it did. After that, she became curious about what exactly he did in such a place. Izo explained that he planned to work as a blacksmith, although he admitted that he had only settled there the previous day. The tiger woman observed him carefully and realized that he still did not smell like he was lying. She then mentioned that she did not remember there being a house anywhere in this part of the forest before. Izo clarified that the house had already been there when he arrived yesterday. The tiger woman explained that she rarely came to this side of the Black Forest, so it was possible she had simply never noticed it before. Hearing the name Black Forest triggered some knowledge from the installation process inside Izo's mind. According to the information he received, this place was located in the eastern section of the forest. The tiger woman explained that she normally stayed around the northern or western areas instead. However, while resting nearby the previous day, she ended up encountering a massive black bear, and everything after that led to her current condition. She admitted that if Izo had not found her, she likely would have been mauled to death. Hearing about the creature left Izo genuinely terrified. The thought that something that dangerous lived nearby made him realize just how lucky he had been not to encounter it himself the day before. After thinking about it, Izo asked whether her injuries would take a long time to heal. The tiger woman explained that beastmen generally possessed much stronger bodies than humans. Even so, with injuries like hers, she estimated that hunting or exploring would probably be impossible for around 2 weeks. Hearing that, Izo suggested that she stay at his house for the time being. The tiger woman was visibly surprised by the offer. Izo then explained that since he had only recently arrived himself, he was already looking for someone who could help with housework and assist him with blacksmithing. In exchange, he would provide her with food and shelter until she fully recovered, which he considered a fair arrangement. The tiger woman fell silent for a moment as she thought things over carefully before eventually agreeing. Since Izo still gave off no suspicious scent, she decided that she would stay there until her injuries healed and she could move normally again. As for what would happen afterward, she decided she would think about it when the time came. Izo simply told her not to worry about that part for now. The tiger woman smiled and told Izo that she would be in his care from now on. Izo then asked for her name, and she introduced herself as Samiya. Aizo thought it was a nice name, but Samiya admitted that she did not like it and did not think it sounded cute at all. Instead, she wished she had a stronger sounding name. Aizo brought up a strange example, and Samiya burst into laughter, wondering what kind of name that even was. Aizo became slightly irritated and told her that it was a name given by her family, so it suited her perfectly well. Samiya thanked him afterward and then asked for his name in return. He introduced himself as Aizo Tanya. Samiya wondered if it was a northern name and asked if he also had a family name. In this world, people with appearances like Aizo's usually lived in the north. Samiya explained that she did not mean to pry, but family names were rare in this area. Aizo told her not to worry about it. Men who carried family names usually had some kind of status and land of their own. Because of that, it was rather strange for someone like Aizo to open a smithy in a place like this. Still, Aizo thought it would be enough if Samiya simply accepted things as they were. Aizo told her that he would prefer it if she just called him by his name. Samiya agreed and decided that was what she would do from now on. After some time passed, Aizo prepared to begin his work. He thought the preparations should already be enough, and decided to start with making a small knife. First, he lit a fire in the firebed. After that, he needed to maintain the temperature until the charcoal fully caught fire. Then came the use of winged magic, which maintained ventilation in the same way as operating bellows. Since the fire was not that strong yet, he could manage it alone. Even so, the heat was far stronger than he had expected. Once the temperature rose above 800 degrees Celsius, the steel would change color, and only then would it be ready for forging. Aizo realized that while he possessed the knowledge, this was still his first real experience doing it himself. Thanks to the cheats he had received, he could instantly tell when the iron was ready. Even so, he found himself surprised, wondering if this strength truly belonged to him. The force behind every strike against the steel felt strange to him. The same feeling crossed his mind when he carried Samiya home the previous day, and again earlier when he carried water. Even back when he was in his 30s, he never possessed this kind of physical strength. At that moment, Aizo clearly realized that he had definitely become stronger. He decided that once Samiya finished eating lunch and rested for a while, he would continue with the afternoon's work. Now came the final steps. He shaped the iron, heated it again, and then cooled it down before quenching it in water. That process strengthened the iron. Afterward, he polished the blade with a file, and finally sharpened it carefully using a whetstone. Step by step, Aizo used the knowledge installed within him along with his own coordination, carving those skills into his body through real experience. Little by little, he guided this body toward true mastery, and that progress was reflected in the sharp form of the finished blade. After some time, the knife was finally complete. It was Aizo's very first creation in this world, and he began wondering what he should test it on. He picked up a bundle of vegetables and sliced through them with the knife. The result immediately surprised him. Aizo stared at the knife in disbelief, wondering what exactly he had just created. The blade had sliced straight through the cutting board underneath the vegetables, and he was left amazed by its absurd sharpness. None of the knives inside the house were anywhere near this sharp. Aizo began questioning if this was really the effect of the cheat he had received. He never wanted a blade that cut almost like magic itself, because it was simply too dangerous. At most, he thought it might only be suitable for self-defense, and he at least needed to attach a proper handle to it first. It seemed that whenever Aizo relied too heavily on his cheat abilities, the knife became unnaturally sharp. There was no way he could sell something that dangerous on the market. Because of that, he decided that tomorrow he would make 3 more knives. One would be sharper than the first, another would be less sharp, and the last would only be barely sharp enough to use. Before deciding what to do with them, he planned to let Samiya test them first. At the moment, Samiya was still asleep. Aizo woke her up and let her know that dinner was ready. Samiya complained that no matter how much she slept, it still did not feel like enough. Aizo asked how her wound was feeling, reminding her that she should avoid moving around too much until her blood recovered properly. Samiya then noticed the object Aizo was holding and wondered if it was some kind of magic as well. Aizo brushed it off as something simple. Aizo handed her the food and reminded her that while sleep was important, eating properly was just as important too. Samiya agreed as she accepted the meal. The dinner was simmered meat with vegetables. Aizo himself did not cook very often, so this was about the limit of his ability. Even in this world, he still needed money for groceries, firewood, and materials for the smithy. The next day, the knives were finally finished. Aizo called Samiya over and asked for her help. Samiya agreed, though she admitted that she did not know much about blacksmith work in the first place. Aizo explained that he only needed her to test how well the knives could cut things. Then he pointed at the first knife and told her to begin with that one. Samiya casually agreed and picked up the lowest-ranked knife first. The moment she sliced through a vegetable, she looked surprised and immediately realized how sharp it was. Aizo then told her to try the second knife. Samiya tested it the same way and sliced through the vegetable even more smoothly than before. Once again, she was left amazed. From behind her, Aizo noted that the second knife seemed even easier to cut with. Samiya stared at the blade in disbelief, unable to understand what she had just experienced because the knife cut far too well. Aizo then instructed her to try the final knife, the one that mattered the most. Samiya prepared herself before testing it. The moment the blade sliced through, a shiver ran through her from sheer amazement. Aizo then told her to try pulling the knife back out. Samiya became confused as she repeatedly wondered what had just happened. Aizo quickly told her to calm down, warning her that holding a knife like that was dangerous. Samiya apologized immediately, and Aizo told her not to worry since he had failed to explain it beforehand. At that point, Aizo finally confirmed it for himself. The cheats he had received truly allowed him to use the abilities of a first-class blacksmith. Aizo realized that if he wanted to properly sell the knives, he would need to think carefully about the level of quality he provided. Hearing that, Samiya asked if she could buy one for herself, thinking it would be useful to have something like that while hunting. Aizo told her that she could simply keep it if she wanted it. Samiya's eyes immediately sparkled with excitement as she reacted in disbelief. She thanked him happily, while Aizo told her not to worry about it. He also mentioned that he would make a sheath for the knife as well, although it would take some time to finish. Samiya agreed before quickly returning to bed to continue resting. With that, Aizo finally decided what he would do moving forward. By lowering the rank of the blades, he would be able to produce more knives consistently. Judging from Samiya's reaction, that level of quality also seemed suitable for selling. For now, Aizo planned to continue making more knives along with farming tools, then sell them to make a living. He had heard that there was a town outside the forest where a lively market was held every weekend. At last, his blacksmith business was beginning. After changing the bandages on Samiya's wound, she tearfully thanked him once again. Aizo asked how she was feeling, and Samiya admitted that while she still did not think she was ready to return to hunting yet, she was definitely feeling much better than before. Aizo then suggested that the two of them head into town that day. It had already been a week since he started making knives, and during that time he had also experimented with crafting a few other tools. Now, they were finally going to town to sell them. The standard quality blades, which Aizo had started calling Model Number 1, could be mass-produced because they were relatively quick to make. By now, Samiya had almost completely recovered. Sometimes the two of them would take walks together, during which she taught Aizo about the forest ecology and other useful knowledge. Aizo found it enjoyable to combine that information with the knowledge already installed in him and figure out practical uses for it. At first, Aizo worried that they might encounter dangerous creatures like wolves or wild boars while walking through the forest, but nothing like that ever happened. Samiya believed it was because Aizo gave off the scent of someone powerful, so there was no need to worry. Even so, Aizo found it strange hearing that from someone as strong as Samiya herself. Deep down, Aizo understood that he still did not fully know the limits of his own abilities. However, he was certain that there were still creatures living in the forest far stronger than him. It took around 2 hours to pass through the forest before reaching the roads, and another hour after that to finally arrive at the town. Aizo suspected that the reason they had not encountered any monsters or even bandits along the way was probably thanks to Samiya being a beastman. After some time, Samiya pointed toward the town in the distance. Just outside the walls, the lively market area of the town finally came into view. Starting up a store outside the walls of the town felt exciting to Aizo. He also realized that he would not even need to worry about paying tolls whenever entering or leaving the town. As they walked nearby, a man suddenly called out and asked them to wait for a moment. When Aizo and Samiya turned around, they saw that it was one of the town guards. The guard asked how he could help them, and Aizo immediately responded with the kind of polite business smile built from 20 years of sales experience. The guard mentioned that he had never seen them around before and asked about the purpose of their visit. Aizo explained that he was a blacksmith and wanted to sell knives at the market. Hearing that, the guard asked to inspect one of the blades. Aizo agreed without hesitation. After examining the knife closely, the guard concluded that everything seemed fine. As Aizo and Samiya continued onward, the guard reminded them not to cause any trouble while in town. At the market entrance, they paid a silver coin to receive a stand along with a sales permit. The stand locations were distributed on a first-come, first-served basis. While walking through the market, Aizo realized that all the better spots had already been taken. Samiya then pointed toward an empty area and suggested they use that location instead. After setting everything up, Aizo finally felt relieved that the preparations were complete. Samiya proudly noted that she had found a good spot, and Aizo replied that he would be relying on her help that day. Samiya answered with a gentle smile. 2 hours passed, yet not a single item had been sold. Aizo tried calling customers over and even demonstrated the products himself, but nothing worked. Deep down, he realized that despite all his past experience, he had originally been a programmer, so he was not used to handling direct sales like this. Nearby, a familiar voice suddenly asked how things were going. It was the same guard from earlier. Aizo jokingly admitted that he could only laugh at the fact that he still had not sold anything. The guard then asked if he could buy one of the knives. Aizo was caught off guard by the request. The guard explained that he had been impressed by the knives earlier, and since his own blade had already been ruined, he hoped to replace it with one of Aizo's. Aizo happily handed over a knife, glad to hear that someone was interested. After examining it again, the guard nodded in satisfaction and asked for the price. Aizo told him it would cost 5 silver coins. The guard looked shocked, wondering if it was really acceptable for such a blade to be sold that cheaply. Before coming to town, Aizo had already discussed prices with Samiya and decided that making the products too expensive would only create problems. The guard paid the 5 silver coins, and Aizo sincerely thanked him for the purchase. It was the very first time Aizo had earned money from something he personally created. Before leaving, the guard mentioned that if the knife proved as good as expected, he would recommend it to the other guards. Aizo confidently assured him that the blade was high quality. Soon after, the guard left. Samiya noticed the grin on Aizo's face and asked if he was finally happy now. Even after another 3 hours passed, no additional customers came by. Looking around, Aizo began thinking that the people there probably had little need for farming tools in the first place. Eventually, Aizo decided that they should start packing up and head home. However, just as they were about to leave, a voice suddenly asked if the shop was already closing. When they turned around, they saw a group of guards standing there. Aizo immediately wondered why they had come over despite not causing any trouble. One older guard stepped forward and asked if this was Aizo's shop, and whether he was the blacksmith who sold a knife to Marius earlier. Aizo clarified that they meant the younger guardsman from before, causing the elder guard to react in surprise. The older guard smiled after confirming it and immediately asked if Aizo still had any knives left in stock. Aizo, still surprised by the sudden interest, quickly showed the remaining knives he had available. Without hesitation, the elder guard declared that he would buy the entire stock. Aizo was completely stunned. Another guardsman explained that Marius had spent their entire lunch break proudly showing off his new knife, so the rest of them became curious enough to come see for themselves. They asked if the blades truly possessed first-class sharpness because they wanted knives of the same quality as well. Aizo calculated the total price and explained that all 8 knives together would cost 40 silver coins. The guards were amazed by how incredibly sharp the blades were. Later, while walking back through the forest, Samiya commented that it was a relief they had managed to sell every single knife. Aizo agreed and thanked her for helping him that day. Since they had sold out completely, he realized it would take some time before he could replenish the stock again. At this point, Aizo had become confident that he could handle more than just simple repairs and basic orders. Next, he planned to try forging a longsword. Eventually, if he managed to strike a deal with a traveling peddler, he would also be able to increase the variety of goods he could sell. Aizo believed it was important to personally test the farming tools and axes he created. At the same time, he also realized that he needed to build a proper room for Samiya as well. Inside the house, Samiya asked Aizo if he knew how to make arrowheads. Aizo asked if she wanted some for herself, and Samiya admitted that she did. Once she fully recovered, she planned to return to hunting, and she thought it would be nice to use arrows made by Aizo. Aizo understood immediately and told her that he would make them for her. Samiya happily thanked him. After some time, Aizo decided to continue focusing on making knives for the day before moving on to the arrowheads for Samiya afterward. He began creating molds out of wood and clay. Once the molds were ready, he poured heated steel into them and waited for the metal to cool. Aizo then suggested that Samiya sharpen the blades herself and attach them to the handles once they were finished. At the same time, Aizo also planned to make a large saw for cutting wood. He additionally modified the axe he had previously tried to sell. Carving the teeth into the saw alone took him an entire day of careful work. The following day, Aizo stood outside staring at a tree. Gripping the axe tightly, he swung it once with full force. Suddenly, he heard the tree creak loudly. To his shock, nearly half of the tree collapsed after just a single strike. Both Aizo and Samiya could only stare in disbelief. Looking down at the axe, Aizo wondered what kind of thing he had just created. He realized that if he was not careful, his second life could end surprisingly fast because of how dangerous these tools were becoming. After preparing the fallen tree, they began splitting it into smaller pieces using the axe. Aizo called out to Samiya and reminded her not to overdo things yet since she still had not fully recovered. After that, the two of them continued working together. Finally, they used the large saw, pulling it back and forth together in order to cut through the tree. While working, Aizo remarked that cutting through the wood almost felt like slicing tofu. Samiya laughed at the comparison, though she also admitted that the sensation felt strangely unnatural. Aizo warned her not to laugh too hard since her body was already trembling from the effort. Once they finished, Aizo commented that the work had gone surprisingly smoothly. At this pace, they would probably finish everything before the day ended. Samiya pointed out that work like this would normally take far longer, but Aizo's tools were simply incredible. Even so, Aizo understood that the reason he could create such amazing tools was because of the knowledge installed within him. In the end, it was still the result of the cheat abilities he had been given. However, for this second life, Aizo wanted to become stronger through his own efforts rather than relying only on unnatural powers. Even then, he remained grateful for the gifts he had received because they allowed him to make a fresh start. Deep down, Aizo still felt like nothing more than a guest in this world. Because of that, he decided that he would use these abilities properly in order to live an honest life, while making sure never to misuse the power he had been given. That night, Samiya noticed that Aizo was still working late. She called out to him, and Aizo looked up in response. Samiya pointed out that Aizo once mentioned that he had not originally lived in this place before. Aizo confirmed that he had indeed said that. She then asked whether he plans to continue living here from now on. Aizo answered without hesitation that he absolutely did. Hearing that made Samiya genuinely happy. She admitted that ever since arriving there, she had not really been able to do much herself. Even so, helping Aizo with his work had been enjoyable for her, and their conversations during meals were always interesting. She also enjoyed the walks they took together. More than anything, she loved watching Aizo while he worked and created things with such focus. Finally, she asked if it was truly alright for them to continue living together like this. Aizo replied that he had already decided to continue living there himself. After saying that, he asked if she was truly alright with staying there too. Samiya's eyes sparkled brightly, and in her happiness she smacked Aizo on the back before thanking him again. Afterward, Aizo finally finished his work and handed Samiya the arrowhead she had requested. Little by little, Aizo's place in this world was slowly being forged through the countless small choices he continued making every day. He quietly hoped that this moment would become the first of many peaceful and pleasant memories still waiting for him in the future. Meanwhile, inside a bar within the town, a man happily mentioned how glad he was that he had bought a knife from Aizo. His companion wondered when Aizo would return to town again because he planned to buy one for himself next time. Nearby, a woman overheard their conversation and approached them with interest. Stepping closer, she asked if she could take a look at the knife they were talking about. Aizo handed Samiya a lunchbox filled with bread and dried meat. He reminded her that she had only just recovered, so if any danger appeared and she had to run, she should come back immediately. Samiya replied that she understood and then left. Aizo told her to stay safe on the trip. After that, Aizo returned to his work. First, he started stocking up the inventory. Starting from today, instead of only making knives, he would also begin making longswords. Aizo checked whether the female mold he had prepared the previous day had properly dried. First, he split it into two halves and removed the male mold. Then he put the two pieces back together, packed them into a barrel filled with sand, and poured melted iron into it. Once it cooled down, he removed the clay and took out the sword. After that, he removed the burrs with a file and hammer, then hammered the sword into shape while it was still hot. Finally, after tempering it, he sharpened the blade. For the finishing touches, he attached the guard, and for the grip, he wrapped the handle with leather. Even though it was fairly simple, he still made the scabbard out of wood. Normally, this kind of work would be done through an assembly line, but thanks to the cheat the watchcat had given him, he could handle a certain amount of the work alone inside the workshop. He had modeled it after a cute cat he once saw on Sis. With that, the first stage was finally completed. From there, he planned to spend the next few days mass-producing lower-ranked, ordinary models, along with knives. However, despite the fact that he was the one who made them himself, Aizo suddenly started imitating a hero holding a sword. Right at that moment, Samiya returned home. She asked what he was doing, causing him to become embarrassed. Unable to explain himself, Aizo simply welcomed her back. Samiya replied that she had returned, but her face was slightly red. Aizo asked what was wrong since she was blushing. She admitted that she was simply feeling a little happy. Aizo pointed out that it really was nice having someone waiting at home. Samiya smiled and agreed with him. In the end, it was a kind of happiness Aizo had never been able to obtain in his previous world. Aizo then asked Samiya whether she had caught anything. Samiya excitedly told him that she had taken down a tree deer. She explained that she had already removed its guts and left it immersed in the lake so they could retrieve it first thing the next morning. Aizo acknowledged it and then asked how the knife and arrows had performed. Samiya replied that they worked great. The next morning, Aizo and Samiya brought home the tree deer that Samiya had hunted and began cutting it apart. Samiya's knife technique, combined with the knife's sharpness, allowed them to quickly finish removing the skin before moving on to cutting the meat into pieces. After all the meat had been cut, Aizo realized that the sharpness it had for slicing meat might actually become a problem. After butchering it, Aizo gradually began recognizing the familiar shape of the meat he was used to seeing. Aizo realized that in his previous world, fruits being sweet and meat already sliced into easy-to-eat pieces only existed because of the effort people had put into preparing them. While cooking some of the meat, Aizo asked Samiya what she had done with the guts she removed from the deer. Samiya explained that if the meat scraps and remaining bones were left in the forest, wolves would come to eat them. Aizo understood and remarked that she had simply returned it back to the forest. While eating the meat, Aizo expressed how he felt about it. It had been a long time since he had eaten fresh meat that tasted this good. Samiya mentioned that next time she would go catch a bird instead. Roasted leaf birds tasted very good. Aizo replied that it sounded nice and left it to her. Samiya smiled at that. Aizo felt that being able to eat plenty of food was an important part of living a slow life. After some time, they carried the remaining meat into the workshop to make dried meat. Aizo also wanted to try eating smoked meat sometime soon. The next morning, Aizo told Samiya that since she was taking a break from hunting, he wanted her to help him with his work. Samiya worked on making a male mold and commented that it was actually pretty interesting. With Samiya helping him once again, Aizo eventually managed to build up enough stock to bring into town. As Aizo and Samiya were about to enter the town, they were greeted by Marius. Marius mentioned that he had not seen them for quite a while and had started getting worried. Aizo thanked him and explained that he had simply run out of stock. Marius then noticed that Aizo had swords with him this time. From behind them, a man spoke up and mentioned that he might come by later to take a look at the swords, so he hoped they would take care of him then. While preparing his stall, Aizo told the man that they would be neighbors for the day. The man agreed and replied that he would be in their care as well. Aizo then asked Samiya if she could buy groceries while they still had time, specifically salt and barley. Samiya acknowledged it and headed off to buy the groceries. After finishing the setup, Aizo remarked that everything was ready and that they could now sell at their own pace. After a while, a man approached Aizo and asked to see his swords. Aizo handed one over, and the man unsheathed it. After carefully examining the blade, the man commented that it was good quality. The man then asked for 4 of the swords. Aizo was visibly surprised and questioned whether he was serious. The man explained that he was a peddler, so he was only buying one for himself. The remaining swords would be taken elsewhere so he could resell them. Aizo finally understood and realized that was how it was. Aizo quietly thought that this could become a good chance to expand his business by selling his products in other places as well. After that, the transaction was completed. Aizo quietly thought about peddlers and traveling. Someday, after saving up enough money, he felt that it might be nice to take Samiya on a journey. Not long after, Marius returned while bringing several of his comrades along. Before long, Aizo ended up selling out all of his ordinary model longswords. The only thing remaining was the high-class model that Aizo had intentionally kept hidden. When Samiya returned, Aizo informed her that all the knives had already sold out. However, Samiya soon noticed someone nearby looking around. It was a dwarf, something she found rather rare. Hearing the word dwarves, Aizo recalled that they were the small people race. Samiya explained that dwarves were not commonly seen around the area. Even for her, most of the encounters she had with them happened in the forest, where she would guide them toward the highway. The dwarf eventually noticed Aizo and Samiya and began walking toward them. She asked Aizo whether he was the one who had made the guard's knives. Aizo confirmed it. The dwarf then noticed one of the knives displayed on the table and asked if she could examine it. Aizo agreed without hesitation. After unsheathing the knife and testing it, the dwarf asked Aizo if he could show her the best item in his stock. Unlike the mass-produced ordinary models, which were priced several times lower, the high-class model had not been displayed because Aizo wanted to sell it only to someone he believed truly deserved it. Yet this dwarf confidently asked for something better immediately after inspecting the knife. Aizo then showed her the sword and told her to try that one instead. The moment the dwarf saw the blade, she was left stunned. She carefully wiped the sword with a cloth, making the blade shine brightly. Aizo quietly noticed that despite her small size, she handled both her hands and footing extremely well. The dwarf carefully inspected every detail while repeatedly testing the sword. Meanwhile, Samiya and Aizo simply watched her in silence. After a while, Samiya pointed out that the dwarf had been examining it for a very long time already. More time passed, and even another customer had already come and gone, yet the dwarf was still there studying the sword. Aizo started wondering whether she would finish anytime soon. Finally, the dwarf spoke and thanked Aizo before saying she would return the sword to him. Aizo's expression clearly showed disappointment after realizing she was not going to buy it. Even so, he simply thanked her back. However, the dwarf then stated that she had a request for Aizo. Hearing that left him confused. Then, the dwarf suddenly wrestled against the ground, drawing the attention of the nearby people. Right after that, she dropped to her knees and pleaded for Aizo to accept her as his disciple. Aizo was completely shocked seeing the dwarf kneeling on the ground before him. A few moments later, Samiya, Aizo, and the dwarf sat down together, and the dwarf introduced herself as Rika Moritz. She expressed that it was nice to meet them. Without even giving Aizo the chance to refuse, the dwarf had suddenly prostrated herself before him in the middle of the crowded street. To properly hear what she wanted to say, they had no choice but to clean up and move somewhere else. Part of the reason was also because Aizo did not want Samiya attracting the public's attention. Samiya then questioned whether Moritz was her family name. Riku explained that Moritz was not a family name, but instead the name of the smithy she worked in. Fundamentally, dwarves gathered together with several families to form a smithy, and because of that, they introduced themselves using the name of the workshop. In other words, she was Rika Moritz from the Moritz smithy. Hearing that, Aizo understood. Aizo then introduced himself and Samiya, while Samiya greeted her as well. Riku asked whether Aizo came from the north, and Aizo answered that it was more or less true. Due to certain circumstances, he was currently working as a blacksmith within the Black Forest. Riku nodded as if it made sense and fell into thought for a moment. She explained that she had wondered why she had never seen a blacksmith with such skill until arriving here, and eventually concluded that Aizo must have come from the north. Aizo then asked what she meant when she spoke about becoming his apprentice. Riku explained that dwarves usually left their respective smithies for several years in order to train. Both she and her brothers had left their workshop for that exact purpose. They would become apprentices under suitable smiths and refine their techniques there. Eventually, they would return to their original workshop and create new things. Afterward, they would once again return to the workshop where they had trained as apprentices. That was the dwarven way of life. Aizo then asked whether they did not care about their technology being leaked to others. Riku explained that for a smithy, having a dwarf become someone's apprentice was considered an honor. The growth of that dwarf, along with the techniques and technology they later brought back, would eventually become a benefit to the smithy as well. After that, Riku took out a knife and explained that a few days earlier, when she had finally arrived in the city, she came across the weapon being used by the guards. Aizo recognized it immediately as one of the knives he had forged. Riku confirmed that was exactly the case. She continued by explaining that Aizo was not this city's official blacksmith and only sold his goods in the free market. Because of that, she had told her brothers to continue ahead while she remained behind, waiting for Aizo to appear there again. Aizo then brought up her brothers, and Riku completed his thought by explaining that they had already gone ahead to search for smithies where they could study on their own. Aizo then pointed out that if he refused her request, Riku calmly answered that she would simply look for another smith herself. Aizo quietly imagined a young girl traveling around alone and thought about how dangerous that could become. Nearby, Samiya simply continued staring silently at Riku. Aizo felt annoyed and thought that Riku was being far too naive. In the end, he decided that he would accept her as his apprentice. Samiya clearly did not look pleased with the decision. However, Aizo explained that before she officially became his apprentice, there were 4 conditions she had to agree to. Riku immediately agreed to listen. The first condition was that he disliked people acting while disregarding their own safety. From now on, she was not allowed to do anything reckless like that again. Riku accepted the condition without complaint. The second condition was that there were not enough rooms in the house, meaning they would have to renovate it. The third was that besides blacksmithing, she would also help out with various chores. Finally, the fourth condition was that they would stop speaking so formally. Aizo told her that he would simply call her Riku, and she could call him Aizo as well. Riku immediately objected to that idea and instead called him master. She explained that as an apprentice, it was only natural for her to respect her master properly. Hearing that, Samiya suddenly burst into laughter, while both Aizo and Riku each reacted differently to the situation. After some time passed, Aizo announced that they had arrived. He explained that the place in front of them served as both their home and their workshop. Seeing the house left Riku visibly shocked. Aizo then asked whether her feet were alright, mentioning that her luggage looked heavy and that the forest path had not been easy to walk through either. Riku replied that she was completely fine. She explained that her body was sturdy, and honestly, the trip had been easier than she expected. Aizo instructed her to place down her luggage and wash her hands nearby. Afterward, he thanked Samiya for considering Riku's condition and choosing a route that was easier to walk through. Samiya ended up reluctantly admitting that she had done exactly that. Later on, the 3 of them sat together for dinner. During the meal, Aizo brought up the issue of space once more, explaining again that there simply were not enough rooms. For the time being, Riku and Samiya would have to sleep together in the bedroom. Riku immediately objected, saying that would be bad for the 2 of them. She explained that she had brought camping equipment with her, so she could simply sleep in the open area nearby instead, while they continued using the bedroom themselves. Aizo explained that he normally did not even use the bedroom anyway, so nothing would really change for him. Hearing that, Riku became confused and questioned how that could be the case even though the 2 of them were husband and wife. The moment those words left her mouth, both Aizo and Samiya accidentally spat out their food in shock. Samiya immediately slammed the table and firmly denied that there was any relationship like that between them. Riku looked surprised and explained that since the 2 of them were living together, she had naturally assumed otherwise. Meanwhile, Aizo quietly wondered whether interracial marriage was even possible in this world, leaving him genuinely confused for a moment. In the end, Aizo brushed it off and explained that there was nothing between him and Samiya, at least for now. Hearing the words "for now" caused Samiya to freeze in shock, and embarrassment quickly spread across her face. Aizo noticed her reaction and asked whether she was alright. Riku then commented that it simply looked like a family living together in the same workshop. The word family lingered in Aizo's mind for a moment. After thinking about it, he admitted that they really were a family in their own way. As he said that, he gently patted Samiya on the head. Afterward, Aizo returned to the earlier topic and stated that until the house renovations were finished, the room arrangements would remain exactly as he had decided before. As both the landlord and the master of the workshop, he expected everyone to follow his decisions. In the end, both of them agreed. Afterward, the renovation work finally began. They polished the wood that had been dried beforehand while also digging holes for the pillar foundations. Since Samiya had gone out hunting, only Aizo and Riku were left to handle the renovations. However, Riku already seemed used to this kind of labor, likely because she had done similar work back at her dwarven smithy. Combined with Aizo's abnormal physical strength, the work progressed at an impressive pace. Sometime later, Samiya returned from her hunt. Aizo welcomed her back and asked how it went. Samiya proudly explained that she had managed to take down a giant tree deer. Afterward, Samiya noticed Riku working nearby and asked what she was doing. Riku explained that while arranging the lumber earlier, she had used the axe and ended up cutting through the wood as if it were cake. She could not understand how the blade could possibly be that sharp. Samiya responded that it really was shocking, admitting that the first time she witnessed it herself, she also found it strange. Hearing that, Aizo quietly thought it was odd that Samiya had reacted that way back then. Aizo then informed Riku that the real blacksmithing work would begin the next day, and they would continue it alongside the house renovations. Riku looked delighted as she immediately agreed. The following morning, the three of them carried the game Samiya had hunted and butchered it. After taking a short rest, they finally began the blacksmithing work. The smelted metal was poured into the molds they had prepared the previous day. As expected, Riku quickly adapted to the work. She moved her hands without hesitation and handled everything skillfully and efficiently. After taking a light lunch break, they began making knives during the afternoon. However, there was one major problem. Aizo's techniques were possible only because of the cheat-like abilities he possessed. He genuinely did not know how to properly teach something like that to another person. At that moment, Riku called out to her master. Aizo decided to be honest with her and admitted that this was his first time ever taking an apprentice. Because of that, he did not really know the proper way to teach someone. Riku immediately understood what he meant and concluded that it was basically a matter of watching and learning. She assured him that everything was fine and declared that she would not miss even a single movement her master made while working. They first focused on creating the mass production model of the knife meant for ordinary people. While Aizo hammered the metal, Riku remained completely focused on observing every action he made. Eventually, Aizo placed the knife into the water, causing a sharp sizzling sound to echo out. He explained that all that remained now was sharpening the blade and finishing the edge. Afterward, he asked Riku whether she had managed to learn anything by observing him. Riku answered honestly, saying that her master truly was amazing. To her, it almost seemed as though he could hear the sound of the iron itself while forging. Even so, she could tell that he was still holding back his true ability. Aizo looked surprised that she had noticed. Riku then explained that her master never looked like he was using his full strength while forging. Besides that, the long sword she had seen before felt slightly different from the knives he was making now. Aizo explained that the knife they were making was meant for ordinary people to use. Because of that, he wanted Riku to first observe the process closely and learn how to create something similar. After saying that, he instructed her to try making one herself. Hearing this, Riku happily agreed. Riku then began the forging process with remarkable precision. As Aizo watched her work, he found himself genuinely surprised by how well she was doing. She had only seen him forge once, yet she was already reproducing the process so skillfully. After some time passed, Riku finished the knife and handed it over to Aizo, asking him to evaluate it. Aizo carefully examined the blade in silence. Inwardly, he admitted that this was seriously impressive work. The knife was by no means inferior to the ordinary models he had created before. However, he still noticed some flaws. Aizo praised Riku for doing well, but pointed out that he could still feel the intense sparks blowing toward him during the forging process. As long as that remained, there was still room for improvement. Even so, Aizo added that he was certain Riku would eventually become capable of forging something like the long sword she had seen before. Hearing those words made Riku genuinely happy, and she immediately declared that she would devote herself fully to practicing her craft. Aizo then explained that today he would forge another blade for her to observe, but this time he would complete every single step from beginning to end in front of her. The first time Aizo watched another person temper iron, he realized something important. Because of the cheat-like ability he possessed, the way he handled iron, the timing of every strike, the temperature, the hardness, and every tiny detail naturally came to him instinctively. He could perfectly create whatever he imagined without losing quality. It was not the result of effort or experience alone. Meanwhile, Riku, an ordinary craftsman, had to rely entirely on their own abilities while striving to master the trade. From the very beginning, they dedicated themselves to gaining knowledge and skill through apprenticeship training and constant study. Because of that, Aizo felt it might even be presumptuous for him to teach Riku directly when he himself did not properly understand the logic behind his own abilities. That was why observing, understanding, and stealing techniques through experience became the most important method for her to learn. Riku patiently waited while watching her master continue his work. Eventually, Aizo finished sharpening the knife and announced that it was complete, while also thanking Riku for waiting. Riku carefully examined the finished blade. She was deeply impressed, calling it magnificent and saying it was incredible that a human could create something like this. To her, it was a true masterpiece, and even among the dwarves, she believed there was nobody capable of reproducing such a technique. Aizo decided to give the finished knife to Riku. Surprised by the offer, Riku questioned whether he was truly sure about it. Aizo explained that he could not really sell a knife of that level anyway, and since she had become his apprentice, she was already considered part of the family now. Riku gratefully thanked Aizo and declared that she would continue learning and practicing diligently until she could someday reach that same level of quality herself. Aizo casually encouraged her to do her best. At that moment, Samiya arrived and reported that the meat processing and tanning preparations had been finished. However, her eyes immediately widened in surprise after noticing the knife in Riku's possession. Riku happily confirmed that she had indeed received one as well. Later, they cooked barbecue outside and ate together under the open sky. During the meal, Riku suddenly asked whether Aizo could use magic. Aizo replied that he could only use simple kinds of magic. Samiya immediately added that Aizo could both handle blacksmithing and use magic, pointing out how amazing that already was. After that, Samiya also mentioned that Aizo had a family name. Samiya then turned toward Aizo, silently waiting for him to reveal it. Hearing that, Riku became curious and asked what the family name was. Aizo answered that it was Tanya. After repeating the name to herself for a moment, Riku immediately referred to herself as Riku Tanya. Samiya was shocked by how quickly things had turned out that way and asked why her name suddenly changed. Riku naturally explained that Tanya was the family name of her master, Aizo, meaning this workshop was effectively the Tanya smithy. Since she was now an apprentice of the smithy, it only made sense for her to be called Riku Tanya. Hearing the explanation, Aizo admitted that her reasoning did make sense. Riku then explained that she had never actually introduced herself using her original family name before. She also suggested that if necessary, they could simply call the workshop the Aizo Smithy instead. Hearing a girl casually use his own name as a surname left Aizo feeling strangely embarrassed inside. However, Samiya quickly complained that it was unfair for only Riku to use Aizo's name like that. She then directly asked whether it would be alright for her to become either Samiya Tanya or Samiya Aizo as well. Aizo quietly thought about it for a moment. After all, he was the one who had invited Samiya to live together with him in the first place. In the end, Aizo admitted that if they were considered family, then there was no real reason to refuse. Hearing that answer caused both Samiya and Riku to cheer happily, while Riku concluded that everything had turned out well in the end. Aizo, who was originally nothing more than a guest in this world, had never really thought about leaving behind anything besides his craftsmanship. Yet now, there was another thing in his life that felt as though it would always remain there beside him. At the same time, the fact that Riku had been so shocked after seeing his work made Aizo realize once again that the cheat-like abilities he possessed were clearly not something normal in this world. In truth, even back in his previous world, that level of sharpness and cutting power would never have been considered ordinary. In addition, Samiya had become his disciple. As a result, the family around Aizo continued to grow. With Riku joining the workshop, someone who took the craft seriously, and with Samiya willingly helping with the workload, Aizo finally gained more time to focus on manufacturing. Because of that, the efficiency of the Aizo workshop steadily improved. Generally, Aizo visited the free market in a nearby town once every week to sell his products. And during one of those visits, he noticed a familiar face waiting for him. Marius told Aizo that lately, more and more people had started asking about his products. In response, Aizo admitted that it was all thanks to Marius and the others spreading the word for him. Meanwhile, the peddler nearby also mentioned that he planned to purchase something later as well. Aizo's products consisted of knives, long swords, and even a few spears. However, every item was separated by rank. First was the model Aizo could produce in large quantities, an all-purpose tool known as the general model. Its price was affordable, and its sharpness had become popular among ordinary people. Even housewives found it easy to use. Then came the luxury model. This version was intended for people already accustomed to handling sharp tools. It offered far better performance while still remaining reasonably priced. Because of that, experienced users preferred it over the standard version. In fact, Izo believed these products could sell even more if he ever managed to strike a deal with a wholesaler somewhere. And finally, there was one last rank. A product that was never displayed openly at the storefront. Izo only agreed to sell it after carefully judging the customer's intentions. The superlative class model. A weapon forged by fully utilizing the cheat-like abilities Watchcat had granted him. Its performance was overwhelmingly high. Too high, in fact. That was exactly why Izo refused to hand it over carelessly to just anyone. Even so, Izo still found himself worrying. Deep down, he wondered what he would do if the opportunity to sell his goods suddenly disappeared one day. Later on, Riku spoke to her master about how they had sold out once again this time. Izo confirmed it. Apparently, the customers who had already bought his products were now spreading rumors about them everywhere. Riku then pointed out that it might already be time to restock their iron, charcoal, and clay supplies. Hearing that, Samiya asked whether they already had a supplier. Izo simply replied that they did not. The Watchcat had prepared the house and workshop for him from the beginning. Izo also had enough food and materials stocked away. However, with more people living and working together now, those supplies had naturally begun to decrease. Because of that, Izo started thinking that perhaps he could ask the peddler for help instead. And as if perfectly timed, the peddler himself suddenly appeared. He called out to Izo, surprised to see him still there. Apparently, he had heard that Izo was already preparing to leave for the day, so he hurried over as fast as possible. At that moment, Izo felt relieved. The timing could not have been better. Izo thanked the peddler, explaining that they had sold out again today thanks to him purchasing so many of their products. He sincerely expressed his gratitude. The peddler responded happily. According to him, Izo's goods had become extremely popular among customers. In fact, he wanted to know if he could purchase even more from him moving forward. Hearing that, Izo was caught off guard. He admitted that if he had known earlier, he could have brought the 10 extra pieces he had forged during the night. The peddler laughed and remarked that Izo was not only a craftsman, but also surprisingly calculating when it came to business. In response, Izo jokingly replied that while he spent his days hammering iron, he still paid proper respect to silver as well. The peddler nodded after hearing Izo's words and said that everything worked out perfectly. Then, he revealed that he actually planned to establish a proper store in this town. Not a temporary stall inside the free market, but a real shop of his own. Hearing that, Izo immediately congratulated him. Camillo thanked him before continuing further. Up until now, he had been trading all sorts of goods while traveling from place to place because he had connections almost everywhere. However, this town was different. Since the newly established town had very few restrictions on trade within the walls, he believed it was the perfect place to open a permanent store. Izo admitted that the idea sounded interesting. In response, Camillo immediately proposed something else. If that was the case, then why not allow his shop to handle the sales of Izo's cutlery and weapons as well? Izo was surprised and asked whether that would truly be alright. Camillo answered without hesitation. Since he already knew the quality of Izo's long swords firsthand, he had complete confidence in the products. Hearing that, Izo briefly wondered whether Camillo himself had actually used one before. Still, he could not deny the truth of the situation. The profits from the free market were unstable. On top of that, more customers were beginning to seek out his products after seeing other people use them. Because of that, Izo admitted that he had already been hoping to make a deal with a wholesaler eventually, and if Camillo truly did not mind, then he would gladly entrust the matter to him. The moment he heard that, Camillo clapped his hands together happily and thanked him. Afterward, he finally introduced himself properly, revealing that his name was Camillo and saying that he was pleased to meet Izo. Izo also introduced himself in return. Then, for some reason, he casually mentioned that he currently lived inside the Black Forest. After that, the two men shook hands. The moment Camillo heard that, his expression changed to shock. He could hardly believe someone actually lived in a place like that. With Izo's level of skill, he could easily make a living anywhere. Camillo even wondered aloud whether Izo was originally from the north, especially since it was uncommon to see someone accompanied by both a beast woman and a dwarf. Changing the topic slightly, Izo then asked about the timing of future wholesale transactions. If the interval between deliveries became significantly longer than once a week, would it be alright for him to notify Camillo ahead of time? Camillo immediately agreed and said that would not be a problem at all. Then, Izo suddenly remembered something else he wanted to discuss before finalizing the negotiation. He explained that he was currently running low on various crafting materials and asked whether Camillo knew any place capable of supplying what he needed. Hearing that, Camillo simply offered to procure the materials himself. Izo was visibly relieved. He admitted that such help would save him tremendously and asked Camillo to take care of the matter moving forward. Camillo explained that he would simply deduct the cost of the materials from the payment for Izo's goods. Izo agreed without objection. And with that, The two sealed the agreement with a fist bump. Aizo felt genuinely satisfied afterward. At the very least, he had now secured a stable method of restocking their materials. Finally, Camillo informed him that the shop would officially open the following week. He told Aizo to bring his goods the next time he came by before saying his goodbyes and leaving. A week later, Aizo arrived at Camillo's newly opened shop together with Riku and Samiya. The moment they stood in front of the building, all three of them stared at it in amazement. The store was far larger than they had expected. As they stepped inside, countless kinds of goods immediately filled their view. Aizo quietly admitted that the place was incredible. Meanwhile, Riku's attention was quickly drawn toward a rare spice displayed nearby, while Samiya noticed a strange scent lingering in the air. Then, mounted neatly on one of the walls, they spotted several familiar weapons on display. One knife, one dagger, and one sword. Looking at them like that, Samiya commented that the weapons finally felt like real merchandise being sold in a proper store. Aizo agreed with her observation. Not long after, Camillo noticed the group arriving and greeted them warmly. Then he invited them upstairs. A short while later, the four of them sat down together in a room above the shop. Aizo explained that this time he had brought knives, a long sword, and several short swords with him. Afterward, he asked Camillo how many he planned to purchase. Without hesitation, Camillo answered that he would take all of them. Hearing that, Aizo could not hide his surprise. Camillo then explained that sales had been going extremely well recently. Aizo admitted that it was good to hear, especially considering how massive the store itself was. Then, curious about something else, he asked whether Camillo's name was already well known among merchants and travelers. Camillo explained that the reason for his success was simple. His store sold goods to everyone equally. Ordinary civilians, travelers, and even professionals all shopped there without distinction. That was precisely why he decided to establish such a large store in the first place. Hearing that explanation, Aizo quietly compared the place to a supermarket in his mind. However, Camillo soon brought up another matter. Apparently, someone had recently requested a custom-made sword forged specifically by Aizo, and when that request arrived, Camillo had not been sure how to respond. Hearing that, Aizo fell into thought for a moment. Deep down, he wanted to carefully establish exactly who would be allowed to wield his creations. At the same time, he also understood that his business would never truly expand if he refused every request that came his way. Seeing him hesitate, Camillo asked whether he should simply reject the order. Aizo shook his head and answered no. He explained that he simply wanted to properly choose the people he sold his weapons to. Camillo nodded in understanding before proposing an idea. He could personally evaluate the customer's skill and personality first, then report his judgment back to Aizo afterward. Aizo admitted that the idea could work. Then, after thinking further, he added another condition. If the customer truly wanted a custom weapon, then they would have to personally come to his workshop themselves. Aizo explained his reasoning clearly. To reach his home, travelers first needed to pass through the Black Forest, a dangerous area where wolves constantly roamed. If someone could safely make it through such a path, then he would naturally be able to judge their abilities to some extent. Camillo agreed immediately and said he understood. As for the matter of personality, Aizo stated that he would trust Camillo's judgment completely. He then decided to tell Camillo the exact location of his workshop and instructed him to only share it with people he personally believed were worthy. Camillo accepted the responsibility without hesitation. After settling the matter, Aizo turned towards Samiya and Riku and apologized slightly before asking them to allow him to handle things this way. Riku immediately answered that she had no objections to whatever her master decided. Samiya agreed as well, saying that she felt the same way. Hearing their support, Aizo thanked both of them sincerely. Camillo simply smiled after hearing everyone's agreement. Then, Aizo suddenly remembered something important and asked whether the materials had already arrived. Camillo confidently answered that not only had he secured them, but he had managed to gather a considerable amount as well. After saying that, he told them to follow him. As the group entered the warehouse, Aizo immediately noticed that the building itself was enormous. Camillo then gestured toward the supplies and casually said that everything was there. The moment Aizo saw the massive stockpile, his eyes widened in excitement. He could hardly believe all of this had been prepared within only a single week. To him, it was genuinely incredible. Looking over the quantity carefully, Aizo estimated that these materials alone would last them for quite a long time. Camillo assured him that with this much stock, he would no longer have to worry about running short on supplies anytime soon. Then, Camillo leaned closer and quietly whispered the price to Aizo. The moment he heard it, Aizo immediately questioned how unbelievably cheap it was. The cost was only around a quarter of the normal wholesale price they had expected. Because of that, Aizo honestly wondered whether Camillo could even make a profit selling it that low. In response, Camillo simply smiled and explained that he was still earning plenty even at that price. Hearing that, Aizo admitted that he no longer had any reason to hesitate. However, after examining the mountain of supplies again, Izo realized there was another problem. While the amount itself was greatly appreciated, it was still too much to carry home by hand. Because of that, he asked whether Camillo perhaps dealt with carts as well. Camillo immediately answered no. Still, after thinking for a moment, he remembered something. There happened to be an unused cart sitting around that he had originally planned to throw away. If Izo repaired it properly, then it should still function without problems. Izo quickly accepted the offer and asked how much the cart would cost. But to his surprise, Camillo answered that it was free. Izo was completely stunned. Camillo casually explained that he had no use for it anyway. Besides, treating loyal customers kindly was only natural. Even so, Izo still found the generosity difficult to believe. He wondered whether there was some hidden motive behind all of this kindness. However, Camillo simply explained that he saw Izo as a supplier with tremendous future potential. To him, maintaining good relationships with craftsmen capable of producing high-quality items at fair prices was extremely important. In the end, Camillo admitted that he was simply investing in goodwill for the future. Hearing that explanation, Izo sincerely thanked him for all the help he had given. Camillo accepted the gratitude with a satisfied smile. Sometime later, all the materials had been loaded onto the cart, and the group finally prepared to head back home. As they traveled along the road, Izo commented that the cart felt a little too heavy for rough terrain, though it should still manage to reach the house somehow. Riku agreed with his assessment. Then, Izo wondered aloud whether they should eventually improve the road leading toward their workshop. Riku immediately pointed out that if they did that, people wanting to request weapons or custom orders would have a much easier time reaching them. Izo admitted that she had a point. However, at that exact moment, something suddenly caught Samiya's attention. She stopped walking and explained that she had detected signs left behind by forest wolves nearby. Then she suggested that they pause for a while and wait. Izo recalled that the same thing had happened earlier that morning as well. Judging by their behavior, the wolves seemed unusually desperate today. Samiya then explained the likely reason. It was almost time for the wolves to give birth. According to her, within another month or so, they would probably start seeing wolf pups around the forest. The moment Izo imagined what the baby wolves might look like, his thoughts drifted for a brief moment. Meanwhile, Riku commented that the wolves living in this forest were surprisingly calm compared to what she expected. Then she wondered aloud whether they ever actually attacked people at all. Samiya explained that the forest was filled with tree deer and grass rabbits. Because of that, finding prey was never a problem for them. Moreover, she added, both she and Izo lived there. In Izo's mind, strong individuals like them were unlikely to become targets. However, Riku raised a question about the weaker ones who might get attacked. Because of that, she understood that wandering around alone was dangerous. Samiya told Riku that whenever she left the house, it would be better to stay with either her or Izo. According to Samiya, the forest wolves were unusually intelligent. Unlike ordinary ground wolves, they displayed a strong sense of social behavior. Perhaps, in order to survive within such a prosperous forest, they had developed wisdom over time. Or maybe their intelligence itself had evolved as a means of protection against danger. Then, Samiya added that wolves were not the only threat in the area. Occasionally, bandits also appeared nearby. Even with both her and Izo around, dangerous people still existed. Therefore, she warned that it was better to remain cautious at all times. As she spoke, Samiya quietly rubbed her stomach. At that moment, Izo suddenly realized something. The black bear that had attacked Samiya before was still somewhere within this forest. Even Samiya, a tiger beast man, could be overwhelmed if she encountered a truly dangerous opponent. However, before he could dwell on that thought any longer, Izo heard something nearby. Instantly, he tightened his grip on the cart. Heavy footsteps echoed through the forest. They were loud and getting closer. Soon enough, a giant black bear appeared before them. It was a natural threat that could not simply be avoided. Later on, after restocking their materials, they began creating new products once again. While inspecting the latest work, Izo commented that it did not look bad at all. Riku agreed. She said that compared to the previous pieces they had made, this one was noticeably better. After all, they had managed to acquire high-quality materials this time. Hearing that, Izo smiled slightly. If Riku believed it was good, then he was certain it was true. Afterward, he simply told her to continue. The ores they purchased from Camillo's shop were placed into a magical ore furnace capable of producing steel. Remarkably, the furnace generated almost no slag during the process. Furthermore, the furnace itself never broke down, allowing it to be reused repeatedly. It was an incredibly efficient system. Even now, Riku remained astonished by the workings of magic. Officially, their workshop relied on manpower to carry out its many operations. However, having the support of a supplier with magical resources almost felt like cheating in itself. To a certain extent, Izo even felt like apologizing to the artisans of this world. Yet honestly, he was deeply grateful for it. Thanks to those advantages, they were able to create detailed craftsmanship despite living deep within the forest. Several days later, Aizo finally let out a satisfied breath. The production quota had finally been achieved. With that finished, he could now focus entirely on renovating the house. Just then, Samiya called out to him. Aizo asked whether something was wrong, but Samiya instead asked if he had already finished his work for the day. When he confirmed it, she told him to come with her for a moment. The moment she showed him the house, Aizo was left speechless in surprise. The renovations were already complete. Even the roof had been finished. Looking at the result before him, he could only describe it as splendid. Aizo immediately thanked Riku for all of her hard work. However, Riku quickly shook her head and insisted that most of the credit belongs to Samiya. In response, Aizo apologized for barely helping with the renovation throughout the week. For the past several days, he had devoted nearly all of his attention to the blacksmithing business. Because of that, the responsibility of repairing the house had fallen almost entirely onto Samiya and Riku. Together, the experienced Riku and the dependable Samiya steadily pushed the renovations forward. Aizo admitted that completing all of that work with only the two of them must have been incredibly difficult. However, Riku replied that compared to ordinary humans, they were naturally much stronger. Once again, Aizo expressed his gratitude toward them. Afterward, Aizo explained that he had already asked Camillo to procure bedding for them next time. Then he mentioned that the next step would be creating the doors, followed by beds and additional tools. Hearing that, Riku asked whether they were planning to install a door for the room as well. Aizo immediately said that of course the rooms would have doors. Then, he asked for confirmation from the others. Riku explained that in ordinary homes, doors were uncommon. Unless it belonged to a noble household, usually only the guest room or the room of the family head and his wife would have one. In most cases, an entire family simply shared a single room together. Meanwhile, Samiya admitted that she had never really lived in a proper house before, so she did not know much about such things. Hearing that, Aizo quietly realized that he had subconsciously spoken based on the common sense of his original world. Still, he decided not to change his mind. No matter what was considered normal there, he wanted the house built his own way. He wanted separate rooms for the family and for the apprentice as well. After hearing his reasoning, both Samiya and Riku agreed with the idea. Soon after, Samiya asked Aizo whether he planned on going to the city again. However, Aizo replied that he would not be going this week. The moment Riku heard that, her expression brightened immediately. A day off. Then, excitedly, she asked what they should do. In response, Aizo simply smiled. Without even realizing it, ever since arriving in this world, he had never truly experienced a proper day off. Although he often talked about maintaining a healthy work-life balance, the reality was different. They continued working every single day without any real boundaries. Still, thanks to the steady sales through Camillo's shop, their situation had gradually improved. They had not saved up a huge amount of money yet, but they at least had enough profit left over for a little spending money. Because of that, Aizo finally decided that this week would be different. It was time to step back from work and properly rest for once. Later, while the three of them walked together through the forest, Samiya pointed toward a certain area and asked Aizo what he thought about it. After taking a look, Aizo nodded and said it looked perfect. He decided they would set up there. After nearly an hour of walking from the house, they eventually arrived at the upper streams of the river. At last, the slow life Aizo had always longed for was finally in front of him. His long-awaited day off had finally arrived. And today, he planned to spend it doing something he had always wanted to try. Using natural materials, Aizo created a simple fishing rod by hand. The thread they had brought from home, combined with a fishhook made from processed rivets, became a homemade fishing setup. Then, while lifting a nearby rock, Aizo mentioned that there were probably bait worms hiding underneath. Sure enough, he found several wriggling beneath the stone. Riku immediately became frightened at the sight of them, while Samiya reacted with visible excitement instead. Watching the two girls react so differently, Aizo quietly thought that there was no way he could have predicted this outcome. Before long, both of them became completely absorbed in the activity. Soon enough, they finally started fishing together. As they cast their lines into the river, Aizo calmly instructed Samiya to loosen the line a little more. Meanwhile, Aizo simply enjoyed the peaceful moments surrounding him. The weather felt comfortable, and the atmosphere was calm. Back in his previous world, he had worked for a black company that barely allowed its employees any time to rest. Now, however, he was finally eating properly and getting enough sleep each day. Even so, the workaholic habits ingrained into him were difficult to erase. Sometimes, it even felt as though he deliberately pushed himself to exhaustion despite already being in another world. Relaxing peacefully like this, Aizo quietly wondered when the last time was that he had truly allowed himself to take it easy. Then suddenly, something tugged sharply on Samiya's fishing rod. Aizo immediately told her to stay still a little longer. If she waited patiently, the fish would bite the bait properly. A few moments later, Aizo gave the signal. Samiya quickly pulled the rod upward and successfully caught a fish. Aizo immediately praised her, telling her that she had done it. Meanwhile, Riku told Samiya to place the fish on the ground first so they could remove the hook safely. As Aizo quietly observed the two of them, he realized something. After spending time working together with Riku, it seemed she had gradually become comfortable enough to speak casually with Samiya. Meanwhile, the two girls happily focused their attention on the fish Samiya had caught. Before long, lunchtime arrived. Although Samiya had caught one fish and Riku had managed to catch two, Aizo himself still had absolutely nothing to show for his efforts. In fact, instead of catching fish, he had reeled in driftwood and leaves 3 separate times. Naturally, Aizo became visibly frustrated. Seeing his expression, Samiya asked whether he had been releasing too much bloodlust. Aizo stared at her in confusion, completely unsure what she meant by that. The strange reaction on his face caused Samiya to point out that he currently looked terrifying. Then, Samiya explained that fish were still animals. Because of that, they naturally became cautious whenever a strong presence was nearby. Even after hearing that explanation, Aizo calmly replied that it was still only midday. There was no reason to become impatient yet. Soon after, Samiya simply laid down nearby and let out a lazy yawn. Aizo quietly looked over at Samiya and Riku as the two peacefully drifted off to sleep. Meanwhile, he remained sitting there alone, quietly reflecting on everything. This was supposed to be recreation during a day off. There was no need to obsess over results. Perhaps this kind of mindset was necessary if he truly wished to become a proper laid-back craftsman someday. After some time passed, Samiya let out another yawn. Then she complained that she had not caught anything since the afternoon started. According to her, fishing was completely different from hunting. She could not simply set traps or constantly move from place to place whenever she felt like it. To her, the entire process was irritating. Hearing that, Aizo quietly repeated the word hunting in his mind. Then, he suddenly remembered something Samiya had mentioned before. During hunting, she once said that she removed all of the prey's internal organs except for the heart. Curious, Aizo asked what happened to the heart afterward. After all, she had never brought it home with her. Samiya replied that she'd buried the heart beneath the forest soil. She then explained that once the soul returned to the forest itself would eventually give birth to new life again. After hearing that explanation, Aizo quietly nodded in understanding. To the beast men of this forest, the heart represented the soul itself. Samiya further explained that wolves and other animals would eventually come to eat the parts that were left unburied. Knowing that, some hunters would remain nearby and stay alert while waiting. As Aizo listened to her words, he quietly reflected on the customs of the beast men living within this forest. Someday, when the time finally came for his own life to end in this world, would the soul of someone who came from another world also become part of this forest? Afterward, they decided to change fishing spots. However, even after relocating, the number of fish they caught did not increase at all. Meanwhile, the sun was already beginning to set. It was probably time to give up for the day. Still, Aizo suddenly reconsidered. Samiya and Riku had managed to catch 3 fish altogether earlier that morning. That meant they could simply divide the fish equally among the 3 of them. 1 fish per person. At that moment, Aizo quietly realized something important. Even though they had only come there to relax and have fun, he still had not caught a single fish by himself. Somehow, his pride as the head of the household and as a master craftsman suddenly felt like it was on the line. Because of that, Aizo firmly resolved that no matter what happened, he absolutely had to catch at least 1 fish before the day ended. The moment Samiya noticed the determination written all over his face, she burst into laughter. She pointed out that Aizo clearly wanted to catch a fish so badly that it was completely obvious from his expression alone. Hearing that, Aizo immediately questioned whether it was really that noticeable. Realizing how serious he looked only made him feel embarrassed. However, before the conversation could continue further, Samiya suddenly told him that something was approaching his line. At the same time, Aizo sensed it as well. Instantly, he straightened his posture. Inside his mind, he repeatedly told himself to stay calm. If he became impatient, the fish would escape. And after coming this far, he absolutely refused to let that happen. Then, at the perfect moment, Aizo pulled the rod upward. This time, he successfully caught the fish. As the fish wriggled in the air, a wide grin naturally spread across Aizo's face. Finally, he had managed to catch one. Seeing his reaction, Samiya asked whether he had always been that bad at hiding his excitement whenever he laughed. Meanwhile, Riku simply praised him and called the catch splendid. In the end, even though Aizo barely caught anything the entire day, the 3 of them still managed to relax, have fun, and enjoy themselves together. And just like that, their day off came to an end as they began heading back home. While walking back, Aizo quietly thought about how work would begin again tomorrow. They still needed to continue the house renovations as well. Normally, the feeling of returning to work would have filled him with the same gloomy heaviness people often felt on a Sunday night before Monday arrived. However, Strangely enough, that feeling no longer existed. Instead, Aizo found himself genuinely looking forward to continuing his life as a blacksmith once more. Apparently, he had become far more satisfied with this new life in another world than he originally realized. Later that evening, after returning home, they held a small celebration together. Aizo praised both Samiya and Riku for all of their hard work that day. Thanks to their progress, they could now rest a little before moving on to the next stage of expanding the house. Little by little, their home was finally beginning to take shape. Hearing those words, both Samiya and Riku looked visibly proud and excited. Soon afterward, simple doors and windows were added to each of the newly constructed rooms. In addition, proper bed frames and mattresses were finally placed inside them as well. At long last, Samiya and Riku each had rooms of their own. Meanwhile, Aizo converted the room he previously slept in into a guest room and study area instead. Aizo then told the two of them that they could finally begin living in their own rooms from now on. Riku admitted that this was her first time ever having a room for herself, which made her feel a little nervous. She simply was not used to such a thing. On the other hand, Samiya suddenly mentioned that she wanted to plant seeds out in the field. In response, Aizo said they would check whether they could obtain some the next time they visited Camillo. At the same time as the house expansion, they had also started cultivating the land beside their home. Currently, they obtained meat and nuts directly from the forest. However, vegetables still had to be purchased from outside. If possible, Aizo wanted them to eventually grow their own vegetables and become as self-sufficient as they could. Thinking about that, Aizo realized that the practice hoes and sickles that never sold before would finally become useful after all. Meanwhile, Rika mentioned that this would also be her first time helping prepare farmland. Then, she remarked that Master Aizo truly seemed knowledgeable about many things. Samiya immediately agreed with her. However, she added that Aizo possessed a rather strange way of knowing so much. The moment she added the word strange, Aizo quickly reacted and complained that she really did not need to include that part. Still, Aizo understood why they thought that way. After all, his knowledge was a strange mixture of information from his previous world alongside the knowledge he received after being granted a second chance at life. Considering that, it was hardly surprising that others found him unusual. Even so, Aizo quietly reflected that there were still many things he himself never understood back in his old world as well. That night, as Aizo prepared to sleep, another thought crossed his mind. Come to think of it, it had been a very long time since he last slept properly in a bed. Ever since arriving in this world, he had practically spent every night sleeping at his desk instead. In a strange way, it seemed he had carried over some of his corporate survival skills from his previous life. Being able to sleep at a desk whenever necessary was probably one of them. Honestly, Aizo could not even tell whether that was a good thing or a bad thing anymore. Physically, his appearance was still young enough to pass for someone around 30 years old. However, mentally he still felt like a 40-year-old man inside. At the very least, he decided that allowing himself some rest now and then was perfectly acceptable. The following day, a woman could be seen approaching their house from the distance. Samiya immediately sensed her presence and turned her attention outside. Noticing her reaction, Aizo asked what was wrong. Samiya calmly replied that someone had arrived. A sudden, thunderous knock echoed through the house. Then, a woman's voice rang out from the other side of the door. She said that Camillo had sent her here, and that she wanted to commission a sword. Aizo was caught off guard. The knock had been unbelievably loud. He quickly called back that he was coming. Meanwhile, Samiya quietly gripped her knife, preparing herself in case something went wrong. Aizo assured her that he would handle it before heading to the door. As soon as Aizo opened it, he greeted the visitor politely. The woman immediately asked if he was the blacksmith forging weapons for Camillo's store. She then introduced herself. Her name was Helen. The moment she spoke, Aizo noticed how loud and powerful her voice was. After confirming that he was indeed Aizo, he welcomed her inside. Since she was his first customer, he treated her with special care. After sitting down, Aizo asked if she had come all the way here alone. Helen casually answered yes. Curious, Aizo asked whether she had run into wolves or any other danger along the way. Helen simply replied that she had not. Instead, Helen explained that finding the workshop had been difficult. However, after spotting smoke in the distance, she followed it until she finally arrived. She also remarked that Aizo's place was surprisingly impressive. Hearing that, Aizo quietly reflected that wolves tended to avoid people who were truly strong. Then Aizo looked at Helen and remarked that she had managed to enter the forest and locate the workshop entirely on her own. In his eyes, that alone meant she had passed the test. And because of that, he declared that he would forge her a sword, just as promised. Afterward, he asked what kind of weapon she wanted. Helen loosened the straps at her waist and revealed her weapons. She explained that she worked as a mercenary. What she wanted was something similar to the sword she already carried, only stronger. She admitted that people on the battlefield rarely had the luxury of maintaining their weapons properly. Still, She firmly stated that the difference between life and death often depended on how well someone could wield their blade. Aizo immediately recognized them as a pair of short swords. The moment he picked one up, he noticed countless scratches covering the surface, along with chipped edges worn down by battle. He silently stared at the blade for a moment. At that instant, Aizo was forced to confront a reality he could no longer ignore. The things he forged were not simple tools. They were weapons meant for battle. If he poured his abilities into creating them, then no enemy standing before those weapons would survive, regardless of size or strength. People would inevitably be wounded or killed by something he had personally made. Until now, and even from this point onward, that was a truth Aizo knew he could never turn away from. It was something he had to accept. Even so, he also understood that he would probably never become comfortable with it. After gathering his thoughts, Aizo commented that Helen's swords were well made. He praised the smith behind them, saying that whoever forged them clearly possessed exceptional skill. Then he asked if he could show the blades to his apprentice, Riku. Helen replied that she did not mind at all. Riku carefully examined the swords. After studying them for a moment, she admitted that they truly were excellent weapons. However, she also added that if Helen wanted something even better than these, then she would probably have no choice except to rely on her master, Aizo. Hearing that, Helen burst into laughter. She jokingly remarked that if even a dwarf was praising Aizo that highly, then there could not possibly be any doubt about his skill. Right after that, Aizo suddenly asked what purpose the swords would serve. The unexpected question visibly caught Helen off guard. Aizo calmly explained that he wanted to understand how the weapons would actually be used. That way, he could use the information as a reference before beginning the forging process. Once she heard the explanation, Helen nodded in understanding. Then, Helen stood up and admitted that it would probably be difficult to explain everything with words alone. Instead, she decided it would be easier to simply show him directly. The group stepped outside. Once they reached the open area, Helen raised both of her swords. Without hesitation, she launched into a display of swordsmanship. Her movements were unbelievably fast. Aizo could only stare in surprise as Helen's blades cut through the air with terrifying speed. As Aizo watched the display, he quickly realized how Helen fought. One sword was used to pressure and restrain the opponent's movements, while the other delivered the killing strike. Even after understanding the principle behind it, however, he still found her speed unbelievable. Then Aizo suddenly noticed something strange. He asked Helen what was wrong. Helen lowered her sword slightly and admitted that it was harder to demonstrate properly without a partner. Then, without hesitation, she asked Aizo why he did not become her sparring partner instead. The suggestion instantly surprised both Aizo and Samiya. Aizo quickly responded that if Helen wanted to spar, then Samiya, the Beastman girl standing nearby, was far more accustomed to combat than he was. However, Helen casually replied that Aizo looked stronger than Samiya anyway. The moment she heard that, Samiya became visibly irritated. She muttered that while it might actually be true, hearing it out loud still hurt her feelings. Meanwhile, Aizo quietly reflected on something important. Ever since arriving in this world, he had never truly experienced real combat. Even so, his current body seemed to instinctively understand how to fight. It was almost as though his body had been specifically built for battle from the very beginning. That was what it meant to be grasped. Because Aizo himself was strong. After thinking it over, Aizo finally agreed. At the same time, he tried reassuring himself internally. Helen was only trying to demonstrate her style. Surely, she was not actually planning to hit him seriously. Aizo stepped forward while Helen faced him directly. Nearby, Samiya and Riku quietly watched the scene unfold. Before they began, Aizo awkwardly asked Helen to go easy on him. Helen immediately smirked and called it a nice joke. The next instant, Helen exploded forward. She closed the distance in a flash and launched her first strike. Aizo barely managed to block it. However, Helen immediately chained the attack into a relentless barrage of consecutive slashes. Even so, Aizo somehow managed to block every single one of them. After a brief exchange, Helen leaped backward. In response, Aizo finally counterattacked, only for Helen to cleanly block his strike as well. To Aizo, her movements resembled a bolt of lightning. Then Aizo rushed forward himself. While clashing against him, Helen admitted that he was not doing half bad. Aizo, meanwhile, desperately told her to give him a break. Inside his mind, however, Aizo understood the terrifying truth of the situation. Without the mysterious cheat abilities he possessed, he would not even be capable of seeing Helen's movements, much less reacting to them. In an instant, she could have sliced him apart without resistance. Even simply keeping up with her attacks was already pushing him to the limit. Then Helen suddenly launched a sideways slash toward him. Aizo narrowly dodged the strike. Unfortunately, the blade still clipped part of his hair as it passed by. At that moment, Aizo finally realized something horrifying. Helen had genuinely been trying to kill him. With an excited grin, Helen rushed at him again while shouting that she was coming. The fierce exchange continued for some time afterward. Eventually, both of them stood there breathing heavily. While panting, Izo muttered in disbelief that he was somehow still alive. Helen, on the other hand, praised him by saying that he really was strong. Izo immediately became annoyed and pointed out that all he had done the entire time was dodge. Helen burst into laughter. Then she casually admitted that she had originally intended to finish the fight within the very first few strikes. She explained that very few people could withstand her Thunder Sword technique head-on. After realizing she had gotten too carried away, Helen apologized to Izo. After calming himself down, Izo finally stated that he now understood her fighting style much better. Because of that, he believed he could complete her swords in around 2 days. He instructed her to return after 3 days. However, Helen suddenly questioned whether that meant she had to head home today. Confused, Izo asked what else she intended to do. Without hesitation, Helen enthusiastically suggested that they fight again after taking a short break. Izo immediately refused, pointing out that if they kept doing that, he would never finish forging her weapon. Helen quickly admitted that he had a point. Then another idea suddenly crossed her mind. Helen asked whether Izo would allow her to stay and watch while he forged the swords instead. Izo reminded her that he had already said the process would take 2 full days. In response, Helen bluntly asked him to simply let her stay over. At that moment, Izo remembered that he had recently prepared a guest room complete with a bed. He then glanced toward both Riku and Samiya for a moment before finally agreeing to let Helen stay. The instant he agreed, Helen enthusiastically slapped Izo on the back in excitement. And just like that, Izo's smithy welcomed its very first customer. After the fight with Helen, Izo decided to finish the remaining work for the day. Before long, Samiya approached Hazel and mentioned that she had already finished removing the burrs. Izo nodded and told her to leave them there. In response, Samiya said she would tidy everything up first before tuning her arrows afterward. A moment later, Izo called out to Samiya. He admitted that she had gotten much better at this kind of work and thanked her for the help. Hearing that, Samiya simply wagged her tail in satisfaction. Whenever she was not out hunting, Samiya usually helped Izo around the workshop. Most of her tasks involved casting and removing burrs from finished pieces. Even so, she seemed to enjoy the work in her own way. Watching her like that, Izo quietly thought it might not be a bad idea to let Samiya use a hammer from time to time. Nearby, Helen silently observed the two of them as they worked together. Then, after some time had passed, Izo finally announced that dinner was ready. As they ate, Helen suddenly recalled something she had seen on her way back earlier. She mentioned spotting an unbelievably huge deer in the forest. Hearing that, Samiya immediately asked if it was a tree deer, warning that those creatures became troublesome once they got angry. Helen casually replied that she would keep that in mind. However, Helen then added that despite the distance, she had also spotted a bear nearby. The moment she mentioned it, both Izo and Samiya reacted with surprise. At the same time, Samiya instinctively clutched her stomach again as painful memories resurfaced. Quietly, Izo realized that the bear was apparently still roaming close to the area. Noticing the sudden tension, Helen asked what was wrong. Izo then explained that Samiya had once been attacked by a bear and had nearly lost her life because of it. Helen calmly responded that if her equipment had been in perfect condition back then, she probably could have taken the beast down herself. Still, Izo immediately warned her not to do anything reckless. Even for someone like Samiya, who had lived in the forest her entire life, the creature had been extremely dangerous. Izo then told Helen that if anything ever happened to her, they would never be able to face it. Hearing his concern, Helen quietly said that she understood. After a while, Izo suddenly slapped his own cheeks to refocus himself. Then he declared that this would become the workshop's very first custom order. Because of that, he wanted everyone to put their soul into it. Right after saying that, Izo cast a magic spell. The next day, Helen plans to inspect their progress. For now, she headed into the forest together with Samiya to gather materials and explore the surroundings. Meanwhile, Izo remained inside the workshop. As he recalled the way Helen had wielded her swords during their fight yesterday, he carefully heated the iron before hammering it out evenly and thinly. He paid close attention to every strike, determined to make the absolute best use of his materials. Thanks to the strange, cheat eyes he possessed, Izo could see something resembling particles hidden within the structure of the iron itself. As he continuously hammered the blades, removing every irregularity while shaping them into form, the overall quality of the swords steadily improved. Later on, Izo told Reik that he intended to test the sword's strength. He then instructed her to bring him one of their ordinary short swords. Reik immediately acknowledged the request and retrieved one for him. Izo stabbed the ordinary sword into a nearby tree trunk before firmly steadying it in place. Then, without hesitation, he swung the newly crafted custom sword against it. After examining the result, Izo quietly concluded that the blade's durability seemed satisfactory. Meanwhile, Reich stared at the weapon in amazement, pointing out that there was not even a single chip on the sword. Aizo soon realized that the ordinary sword he used for testing could no longer be sold through wholesale. Seeing that, Reich asked whether it would still be fine to sell the weapon after reworking or sharpening it again. Aizo admitted that the quality itself was not the issue. As far as craftsmanship went, the sword was still perfectly usable. However, he simply did not want to sell something that had already been used to test another blade. Instead, Aizo decided that they would rework the sword and keep it for personal use at home. Hearing that, Reich remarked that he truly was a stubborn craftsman. In response, Aizo only grinned and proudly agreed. Still, even if Aizo was stubborn about his craft, he was not a bad person. Regardless of whether this power had been given to him artificially or not, he intended to pour every ounce of determination he had into his work. Little by little, he felt himself getting closer to the dream he once longed for back then, and realizing that alone made Aizo genuinely happy. For the final touch, Aizo carefully carved something into the pommel of the sword. Once he finished, he quietly declared that the first blade was finally complete. Curious, Reich immediately asked to see it. Aizo casually replied that he did not mind before handing the sword over to her. The moment the weapon reached her hands, Reich stared at it intensely. Watching her reaction, Aizo quietly noticed that her gaze seemed so sharp that not even a single particle could escape her attention. Then he casually asked whether the sword had been made well enough. After examining it closely, Reich admitted that this was not something achievable with ordinary talent. No, not even moderate talent could produce a blade like this. Then, after a brief pause, Reich apologized for touching on her master's past circumstances. Even so, she honestly stated that regardless of the reason they had lost him, the North had suffered a tremendous loss. Hearing that, Aizo asked in surprise if he had truly been that skilled. Reich answered without hesitation, and to her, there was absolutely no doubt about it. Certainly, the power residing within Aizo's hands was not normal. No, perhaps it could not even be called real. By now, after using that power to its absolute fullest with a clear purpose in mind, Aizo had begun to understand something important. This time, while working with iron, he had focused entirely on durability. Because of that, the sword would never possess enough sharpness to split a massive boulder in half. However, if he had instead focused purely on sharpness, then accomplishing something like that might actually become possible. And if that ever happened, the result would no longer be an ordinary weapon. It would become something terrifyingly powerful. Then another thought crossed Aizo's mind. If even iron could become this extraordinary, what kind of weapon would he create if he ever worked with materials superior to iron itself? Durability and hardness. If he truly wished for it, he could likely forge a weapon that possessed both qualities at once. And now, Aizo finally understood the true meaning behind that possibility. In other words, if he became careless with this power, he would not simply influence the fate of the weapon's wielder. There was a chance he could place them into even greater danger instead. If the weapons created by Aizo eventually became comparable to strategic military arms, then would he truly possess the resolve necessary to shoulder such a burden? At that moment, Reich suddenly called out to her master. Noticing his silence, she apologized and nervously asked if she had somehow offended him. Aizo quickly denied it. He calmly replied that it was nothing serious. He had simply been lost in thought. Aizo decided that there was no point in drowning himself in worries over things that had not even happened yet. Of course, he would keep those concerns in mind whenever he accepted future requests. Still, at the very least, he had managed to create something that made Reich genuinely happy to become his apprentice. For now, that alone was enough for him. Before long, Samiya and Helen finally returned from their hunt. The moment they arrived, Helen happily announced that they had gathered quite a large amount of supplies. She explained that they found plenty of medicinal herbs useful for suppressing festering wounds. Along with that, they also collected various bitter and sweet ingredients from the forest. Meanwhile, Samiya mentioned something else that caught her attention. She told Aizo that the wolves around the forest had been acting unusually restless all day. To her, there was little doubt that the cause was the massive black bear Helen had spotted earlier. Hearing that, Aizo quietly responded that he understood. Then, without lingering on the topic any further, he simply announced that it was time to eat. As Aizo smiled toward her, Samiya immediately brightened up and happily agreed. Still, deep down, Aizo could not stop thinking about the bear. Not only for Samiya's sake, but for Reich's safety as well, he realized he needed to stay cautious so none of them would get dragged into unnecessary danger. The following day, Aizo resumed work on the special order. This time, he focused on forging the second blade while Helen carefully observed the entire process nearby. As she watched, Helen admitted that Aizo made the work look surprisingly easy. On top of that, she pointed out how incredibly fast he was. In response, Reich confidently stated that for someone like her master, working at such speed posed no problem at all. Curious, Helen then asked whether Reich herself could ever reach that level someday. However, Reich honestly answered that even if she devoted her entire life to learning, she still did not know whether she could ever catch up to Izo. Hearing that, Helen looked slightly surprised and asked if that was truly the case even for a dwarf like her. Reich immediately replied that it only proved just how extraordinary Izo truly was. Meanwhile, Izo overheard the entire conversation while continuing his work. Although he appreciated their admiration, being praised that much still made him uncomfortable. After all, he knew very well that he relied heavily on what he considered a cheat ability. At some point, Helen suddenly recognized the blades as lightning blades. Then, after finishing the final touches, Izo calmly declared that both swords were finally complete before carefully placing them onto the table. The moment Helen saw the two finished weapons, excitement instantly filled her expression. She quickly noticed the lightning-like qualities flowing through the blades themselves. Eagerly, she tried to examine them right away. However, before she could continue, Izo interrupted her and pointed out that it was already late. He told her that she could inspect them properly tomorrow instead. Izo admitted that the crafting process had taken much longer than expected and apologized for making Helen wait so long. Even so, he encouraged her to look forward to tomorrow instead. At first, Helen tried to protest, clearly unable to contain her excitement, but eventually, she gave up and reluctantly agreed. Then Izo shifted the mood entirely. Rather than continuing with the swords, he decided to prepare dinner for everyone instead. The moment the meal was served, Samiya, Helen, and Reich all reacted with delight. Almost immediately, Samiya recognized the dish as tree deer steak. After tasting it, Samiya excitedly declared that it was amazing. Meanwhile, Helen noticed the raspberries they had gathered earlier and asked if those were really the same berries from today. She admitted that she never knew they could be used in cooking like this. Even Reich mentioned that back at her former home, they had never eaten meals like these before. Hearing all of that, Izo calmly explained that today marked the completion of his very first special order. Because of that, he considered the dinner a small celebration for the occasion. Hearing Izo's words, Samiya immediately agreed and congratulated him on completing the order. Right after that, Reich congratulated him as well. Izo thanked both of them and admitted that he could not have finished the work without Reich's help throughout the process. Meanwhile, Helen celebrated in her usual energetic way by smacking Izo on the head before congratulating him too. In response, Izo pointed out that none of this would have happened if Helen had never placed the order in the first place. Because of that, he thanked her sincerely as well. The following day, Helen finally tested the swords outside. The moment she gripped one of the blades, she immediately remarked that it fit perfectly in her hand. Then she admitted that she had been so excited the previous night that she could barely sleep at all.